Jessica Cooper stood out among the sea of alien students at the Galactic Academy of Xenobiology, and not just because she was the only human in her class. While her classmates floated, slithered, or glided through the crystalline halls with ethereal grace, Jess walked with the confident swagger of someone who'd spent their life working the family ranch in Montana. "Fascinating," whispered a floating orb of bioluminescent gas to its neighbor. "The Deathworlder appears to be displaying dominance behaviors through its locomotion patterns." Jess pretended not to hear, hiding her smile. After 3 months at the academy, she'd gotten used to being treated like a walking research subject. The constant whispers and data recording had stopped bothering her. Around the same time, she caught a group of Arthrosians attempting to document her eating habits. Their horrified reactions to watching her consume dead animal flesh had been worth every second of scrutiny. Professor Zextalax's tentacles rippled with anticipation as Jess entered the lecture hall. The cephalodian instructor had taken a particular interest in her ever since she casually mentioned helping rehabilitate injured mountain lions back home. "Today, class," the professor's translator chirped, "we begin our final assignment of the semester." Multiple appendages gestured at the holoscreen behind him, which displayed various alien creatures in their natural habitats. "Each student will select a predatory species from our specimen preserve and conduct a comprehensive analysis of its hunting patterns through direct observation." The lecture hall erupted in a cacophony of alarmed clicks, whistles, and pheromone releases. A Floraxian student near Jess actually began to photosynthesize in distress, their leaves turning a sickly yellow. "Direct observation," squeaked Xetal, Jess's lab partner. The plant-based alien's tendrils wrap protectively around their central stalk. "But Professor, the preserve contains actual living specimens. Some of them are classified as Class 3 hazards." Jess was already scrolling through the specimen database on her holopad, her eyes lighting up at each new entry. Back home, she'd helped track everything from wolves to bears. But this was a whole new level of exciting. Precisely why this assignment is so valuable, Professor Zextalax continued. Understanding predator behavior requires more than theoretical knowledge. One must witness their hunting patterns firsthand. A tentacle gestured toward Jess. "Miss Cooper, you seem quite engaged with the specimen catalog. Perhaps you'd like to share your thoughts." Jess looked up, not bothering to hide her enthusiasm. "Well, sir, I'm noticing some interesting parallels between these alien predators and Earth species. This shadow leaper here." She projected an image of a six-limbed creature with mirror-like scales. "Its ambush tactics remind me of mountain lions. And this void stalker. Classic pack hunter behavior, like wolves." The entire class turned to stare at her, their various sensory organs wide with shock. The casual way she discussed apex predators seemed to both terrify and fascinate them. "When do we start?" Jess asked, already making mental notes about what equipment she'd need to requisition. This wasn't so different from her summer job, helping wildlife researchers tag and track predators in Yellowstone. Professor Zextalax's skin shifted to a pleased shade of purple. "Your enthusiasm is noted, Miss Cooper. Students have 1 week to select their specimens and submit their observation proposals. Remember, safety protocols must be followed at all times." As the class filed out, Jess overheard Xetal whispering to another student. "Did you see how the human's eyes dilated when viewing the predator files?" Classic hunting response. "Do you think she realizes she's displaying predatory behaviors herself?" Jess chuckled, already planning her specimen choice. If they thought looking at pictures was scary, wait until they saw a human in action. This was going to be the most interesting homework assignment of her life. Little did she know, it would soon become the most talked about event in Academy history. The Academy's specimen database hummed softly as Jess scrolled through entry after entry, her boots propped up on her desk in the study pod. Most students had immediately gravitated toward the herbivores and Class 1 predators, but Jess kept diving deeper into the catalog, past the warnings and danger signs that would have sent her classmates into hiding. That's when she saw it. "The Night Stalker," she whispered, leaning forward. The holoscreen displayed a creature that looked like someone had crossed a panther with a nightmare. Its bioluminescent markings pulsed hypnotically, and its 6 eyes seemed to stare right through the recording. The size comparison chart next to it showed it standing as tall as a horse, with twice the mass. No. Sheetal's voice cracked as they burst into the study pod, leaves quivering. By the sacred sunlight, please tell me you're not considering what I think you're considering. Jess grinned, spinning her chair to face her lab partner. Come on, Sheetal. Look at these hunting patterns. It's basically just a space leopard with extra steps. A space. Sheetal's translator glitched from sheer stress. Jess, the Night Stalker drove the entire Praxian civilization to extinction. They abandoned 3 colony worlds just because they found its tracks. Really? Jess pulled up the historical data, genuinely intrigued. How'd they know it was just one creature? Because it left survivors just to spread the terror, came Professor Zextalax's voice from the doorway. The cephalodian's skin had taken on a concerned gray hue. Miss Cooper, while I admire your academic ambition, perhaps something less lethal would be more appropriate. Jess stood up, excitement clear in her voice. But Professor, look at these stats. Its hunting style is almost identical to the Komodo dragons I helped track in Indonesia. They're endangered on Earth, but we still study them. Plus, she pulled up another chart. Its territory marking behavior matches Wolverine's perfectly. I've dealt with those cranky guys plenty of times back home. The professor's tentacles twisted in what Jess had learned was their equivalent of a concerned frown. No student has ever successfully collected data on the Night Stalker. The last 3 who tried transferred to botanical studies. Sheetal finished with a shudder. Then it's about time someone did it right, Jess said, already drafting her proposal. Look at these rookie mistakes in the previous attempts. They treated it like a mindless beast, but this is an intelligent predator. You need to think like one to track one. The holoscreen displayed her preliminary analysis, and despite himself, Professor Zextalax moved closer to study it. His color shifted slightly toward academic interest. You've identified patterns no one else has noticed, he admitted, tentacles gesturing at her notes. That's because everyone else was too busy running away, Jess explained, pulling up comparison footage. See this stalking technique, classic ambush predator behavior. And these territorial markers. It's not just marking its space, it's creating a fear response. Smart, but not unbeatable. Sheetal had begun stress photosynthesizing again. Jess, please. Choose something safer. The Resorwing collection only has a 15% mortality rate. Too late, Jess said, hitting submit on her proposal. Besides, this is perfect. The Night Stalker needs to be properly documented for science. And honestly, she grinned, showing just a few too many teeth by alien standards. It reminds me of this ornery mountain lion I helped rehabilitate. Sane attitude problem. The professor's skin rippled through several colors before settling on resigned acceptance. Your proposal will be reviewed by the safety board. Though I suspect trying to stop you would be like trying to convince a quantum particle to stay still. As Jess packed up her holopad, she noticed several other students hovering anxiously outside the study pod, their various sensory organs fixed on her in horror. Word had spread fast. Hey, she called out to them cheerfully. Anyone want to be my backup photographer? The resulting stampede to escape left scorch marks on the corridor's crystalline walls. Was it something I said? Jess asked Sheetal innocently, while already making mental notes about what gear she'd need to requisition. This was going to be fun. The Academy's requisition office had never seen anything quite like Jessica Cooper's equipment list. The logistics officer, a gelatinous being named Blorp, oscillated between shades of confusion as they reviewed her requests. Let me understand this correctly, Blorp burbled, their translation matrix struggling to keep up with their bewilderment. You want rope, high tensile strength, about 50 meters should do it, Jess confirmed, checking items off on her holopad. And those thermal trackers you've got gathering dust in the back room. But the standard safety kit for specimen observation includes a Class 4 force field generator, 3 types of neural stunners, and an emergency teleporter. Blorp's surface rippled in distress. "You haven't requested any of those." Jess shrugged, adjusting her worn leather boots. "Can't rely on tech that might fail. Besides, force fields make too much noise. They'll spook the Night Stalker." "Spook the..." Blorp's entire form quivered. "The purpose is to keep it away from you." "Actually, the purpose is to observe its hunting patterns," Jess corrected, pulling up a holographic checklist. "Now about that climbing gear I requested." The next hour involved Jess explaining, with increasing patience, why she needed each seemingly primitive item. The backup knife, always have a backup, caused Blorp to temporarily lose cohesion. The request for basic trail rations, in case I need to wait it out, nearly triggered a facility-wide shutdown. "At least take a distress beacon," Blorp pleaded, their form now a pale, worried shade of mauve. "Already got one." Jess patted her pocket. "Standard issue from Earth. We call it a smartphone." Word of her equipment choices spread through the academy faster than a quantum transmission. By afternoon, a small crowd of alien students had gathered outside the requisition office, their various sensory organs fixated on the growing pile of primitive gear. Kittle burst in, their leaves practically tied in knots with worry. "Jess, the entire xenobiology department is watching your preparation livestream. Professor Zextilax is using it as a case study in Deathworlder decision-making processes." "Cool," Jess replied, testing the tension on a length of rope. "Maybe they'll learn something useful. Hey, want to help me pack these protein bars?" Sittle's leaves drooped. "Those are your emergency rations, processed nutrient blocks." "Nah, these are just snacks. Trail mix and beef jerky, family recipe." Jess grinned at the collective gasp from the watching crowd. "What? Tracking takes energy. Speaking of which..." She pulled out her old hunting knife, the one her grandfather had given her for her 16th birthday. The blade caught the light as she checked its edge, causing several observers to emit distress pheromones. Is that a primitive cutting implement?" Someone whispered in horror. "This? Nah, this is just old reliable. Never go tracking without it." Jess slipped the knife into its sheath with practiced ease. "My backup is the primitive one." The betting pool, which had started at 10-to-1 odds against her survival, suddenly shifted. The biology department, led by Professor Zextilax, was placing surprisingly large bets on her success. The psychology department was too busy documenting what they called classic Deathworlder preparation rituals to bet at all. As Jess packed her gear with methodical precision, she found herself humming an old tracking song her father had taught her. The sound made several nearby students scurry away in terror. "You know," she said to Xytel, who remained frozen between curiosity and fear, "back home, this would just be called getting ready for a weekend camping trip. In your Montana." Cheetle asked, their translator struggling with the foreign word. "Yep, except there, you have to worry about bears raiding your cooler." She paused, considering. "Though I guess the Night Stalker probably won't be interested in my beef jerky." "No," Cheetle agreed faintly, "just in consuming your internal organs." Jess zipped up her pack with a satisfying snap. "Well, can't track on an empty stomach. Anyone want to grab lunch before I head out?" The requisition office cleared out so fast it left scorch marks on the floor. Again. "Must be lunch rush," Jess muttered, shouldering her pack. Time to go hunting. The preserve's artificial environment shifted from sterile corridor to dense alien forest with a suddenness that would have disoriented most beings. Jess just took a deep breath, savoring the smell of alien vegetation and fresh dirt. Above her, through the transparent observation dome, hundreds of students and faculty members pressed against the reinforced material, recording devices at the ready. "Beginning observation log." Jess spoke quietly into her recorder. "Initial survey shows signs of recent activity. Displaced vegetation approximately 20 meters ahead. consistent with a large predator's passage. Through her earpiece, she could hear the panicked whispers of the observation team. The human is deliberately following the Night Stalker's trail. One voice squeaked. This must be what the humans call a death wish. Actually, Jess muttered, kneeling to examine some disturbed soil, this is what we call tracking. And you might want to switch to private channels. Sound carries better than you think down here. The observation channels went dead silent. Moving with the quiet confidence that came from years of tracking predators, Jess began laying out her surveillance points. Each motion was deliberate, measured, and though she'd never admitted to her terrified classmates, exciting. This was better than any weekend hunting trip back home. She spotted the first real sign of her quarry about an hour in. Bioluminescent marking fluid that made the surrounding vegetation glow with an eerie purple light. Territorial marking, she narrated, taking samples while keeping her other senses alert. Similar to big cats, but with an added psychological warfare component, the luminescence appears designed to. A low growl echoed through the preserve, causing the observation dome to practically vibrate with the collective gasp of her audience. To distract prey while the predator makes its approach, Jess finished calmly, already moving. Not away from the sound, but parallel to it. Classic misdirection. The real attack will come from. The Night Stalker burst from the underbrush to her left, exactly where she predicted. 6 eyes blazing with intelligence and fury, body rippling with deadly grace. It was every bit as terrifying as the record suggested. Standing nearly as tall as a horse at the shoulder, with midnight black fur traced with glowing purple patterns, it was a creature designed by evolution to inspire terror. Well, hey there, beautiful, Jess breathed, a grin spreading across her face. Aren't you just the prettiest thing I've ever seen? The Night Stalker faltered mid-stalk, its 6 eyes blinking in sequence. This was not the typical prey response. Up in the observation dome, Seagull had to be restrained from triggering the emergency evacuation protocols. Her heart rate is elevated. But it's not fear response. She's excited. The human is actually excited. Professor Zextalax's tentacles were tied in knots as he watched. Fascinating. She's displaying classic human hunting behaviors. Look at her positioning. She's already identified 3 escape routes while maintaining optimal observation angles. The Night Stalker circled, its bioluminescent patterns pulsing in hypnotic waves designed to disorient prey. Jess tracked it with the calm focus of someone who'd spent summers helping wildlife researchers tag mountain lions. Subject is attempting psychological warfare tactics, she narrated, deliberately keeping her voice steady. Similar to a rattlesnake's warning display, but with added neural disruption components. Good thing humans are particularly resistant to these kinds of effects. Probably all those warning labels we ignore. The creature let out a roar that had driven entire species to extinction. Jess just nodded appreciatively. Impressive vocal range. Reminds me of that time we had to relocate a grizzly family from Old Man Johnson's property. Though his prize bull made more noise, if I'm being honest. In the dome, the psychology department was having a field day. The human is attempting to establish dominance through casual conversation. We've only seen this behavior in their most dangerous warriors. Nah, Jess muttered, already setting up her first observation post, while keeping one eye on her new friend. This is just how we process excitement back home. Now let's see what other tricks you've got. Gorgeous. The Night Stalker's 6 eyes narrowed. For the first time in its existence, it was beginning to feel like it might not be the apex predator in the room. 3 hours into the observation, the preserve's artificial environment had become a battlefield of wits. Not that most of the observers could tell. To them, it looked like Jess was simply wandering around, occasionally taking notes while a terror from the depths of space stalked her. Subject exhibits advanced problem-solving capabilities, Jess narrated, deliberately stepping over a tripvine the Night Stalker had set up. Has attempted 17 different hunting strategies so far, each one building on information gathered from previous failures. Highly intelligent, adaptive, and getting frustrated. A snarl echoed from somewhere to her left, a perfect mimicry of the sound that had come from her right moments ago. Audio misdirection, Jess noted, already moving to higher ground. Nice try, buddy, but I grew up tracking mountain lions. They play the same game, just with fewer eyes. In the observation dome, the xenobiology department had given up taking notes and was simply staring in horrified fascination. Professor Zextalax's tentacles were tied in so many knots he'd need help from the mathematics department to untangle them. The human's heart rate indicates excitement, not fear, one researcher whispered. And her endorphin levels. She's enjoying this. Of course she is, Jeetal muttered, leaves trembling. She's from Montana. They do this for fun there. The Night Stalker emerged from the underbrush, its bioluminescent patterns now pulsing in rapid, disorienting sequences known to cause seizures in most species. Jess just smiled and pulled out her grandfather's knife, using its polished surface to reflect the light back at the creature. Interesting reaction, she commented as the Night Stalker jerked back, momentarily confused by its own light show. Subject displays sensitivity to reflected bioluminescence. Possible evolutionary oversight. The creature's 6 eyes narrowed, and it began what had been its most successful hunting pattern, a complex series of movements designed to trap prey in an ever-tightening spiral of terror and confusion. Jess recognized the pattern immediately, similar to the hunting style of Komodo dragons, but with added psychological warfare components. Subject is attempting to create the illusion of multiple attackers through rapid position changes and sensory manipulation. She began moving in a counter pattern, one taught to her by old trackers back home. Unfortunately for our friend here, humans wrote the book on persistence hunting. In the dome, the psychology department was having collective palpitations. She's using the Night Stalker's own hunting ground against it. One observer squeaked. Look at how she's positioned those markers. She's actually hurting it. Impossible. Another scoffed. No one herds a Night Stalker. They're apex predators. Technically, Jittle interjected, remembering something Jess had once told them. Humans are what you'd call apex predators. They hunt the things that hunt other things. The Night Stalker was beginning to realize something was wrong. Its perfectly evolved hunting patterns, honed over millennia of being the universe's perfect killer, were somehow being countered by this strange two-legged creature who seemed to be, was she humming? Home on the range. Jess sang softly, maintaining steady movement as she documented the creature's increasingly agitated behavior. Subject shows signs of cognitive distress when faced with prey that doesn't follow normal fear responses. Fascinating adaptation to psychological warfare tactics, or rather, lack thereof. The creature let out another reality-shattering roar, one that had historically caused entire species to abandon their colonies. Jess just checked her watch. Nice projection on that one. Better than the last few. But you're starting to repeat yourself. Beautiful. Getting tired. For the first time in recorded history, a Night Stalker showed signs of uncertainty. It had been conducting a complex hunt for hours, burning enormous amounts of energy, and its prey was taking notes. Subject is entering the final stages of predatory frustration, Jess narrated, already moving to implement the last phase of her observation plan. Time to show this gorgeous creature why humans earned their Deathworlder status. In the dome, Xetal covered their photoreceptors. I can't watch. But I also can't look away. The dance of predators was about to reach its crescendo. The Night Stalker had never experienced anything like this in its evolutionary history. Its prey was supposed to run, to hide, to succumb to terror, not systematically document its hunting techniques while offering running commentary. Subject appears to be reaching physical exhaustion, Jess noted, her voice carrying the same tone she'd used when helping tired calves during birthing season. Breathing pattern irregular, bioluminescent displays showing decreased intensity. Time to wrap this up. In the observation dome, the entire xenobiology faculty watched in stunned silence as Jess began moving with new purpose, her previous circular patterns shifting into something more deliberate. "By the sacred suns," Shittle whispered, "she's not running from it anymore. She's pushing it." Professor Zextalax's color had shifted to academic excitement. "She's been hurting it this entire time. Those seemingly random movements were actually basic ranch work," Jess commented into her recorder, knowing the observation team was listening. Subject's gotten itself all turned around, burning energy on fancy light shows when it should have been watching its positioning. Rookie mistake, really. Like a wolf that's all teeth and no strategy. The Night Stalker suddenly realized it was being funneled into a narrowing path between two ridge formations. It tried to turn, to leap away, but found its escape routes blocked by carefully placed markers and lines that its instincts screamed not to cross. Fun fact about predators, Jess continued, her boots making deliberate sound patterns that kept the creature moving exactly where she wanted it. They're often so used to being the hunter that they forget to watch for bigger hunters. Back home, we call that mountain lion syndrome, thinking you're the biggest bad in the valley until you meet a grizzly. With a final series of movements that would have made her ranching family proud, Jess cornered the Night Stalker in a natural alcove. The creature, realizing its predicament, tried its final and most devastating attack, a full sensory assault of roars, bioluminescent pulses, and pheromone releases that had driven entire species to madness. Jess just pulled out her sampling kit. "Now hold still, beautiful," she said, her voice taking on the soothing tone she'd used on spooked horses. "This won't hurt a bit." The Night Stalker, terror of 3 galactic sectors, apex predator of a dozen worlds, found itself frozen in confusion as this strange two-legged being calmly approached with scientific instruments. Subject displays classic signs of predator confusion when confronted with confident prey behavior, Jess narrated, taking her samples with professional efficiency. Similar to how mountain lions react when they realize they've picked a fight with someone who fights back. In the dome, the entire faculty was silent except for the sound of furious note-taking. She's petting it," someone whispered in disbelief. Indeed, Jess had finished her sampling and was now giving the exhausted Night Stalker an appreciative scratch behind what appeared to be its ear equivalent. The creature's bioluminescent patterns had shifted from threatening pulses to confused flickers. "Good girl," Jess said softly. "You're just a big old space cat, aren't you? All that fancy hunting just to end up getting scratches like a ranch dog." The Night Stalker, against every instinct of its species, found itself leaning into the touch. Its 6 eyes blinked in sequence, confusion warring with an unfamiliar sensation. "Respect." "Sample collection complete," Jess announced, giving the creature one final pat. Subject shows remarkable similarity to Earth's apex predators in both hunting patterns and behavior when dominated by a superior predator. Also, she added with a grin, responds well to positive reinforcement and ear scratches. As she packed up her equipment, the Night Stalker watched her with what could only be described as bewildered resignation. Its status as the Preserve's ultimate terror had just been thoroughly and systematically dismantled by someone who treated the whole experience like a fun day at work. "See you around, beautiful," Jess called over her shoulder as she headed for the exit. "Thanks for the data." In the observation dome, Cetal finally remembered to breathe. "Humans," they muttered, "are terrifying." Professor Zextalax's tentacles had untied themselves just enough to start writing the first draft of what would become a groundbreaking paper, Deathworlder Handling Techniques. A new approach to apex predator studies. The Academy's main lecture hall had never been so packed. Students and faculty from every department crowded the crystalline amphitheater, their various sensory organs fixed on the human standing casually at the podium. Behind her, holographic displays showed detailed analyses of the Night Stalker's behavior patterns. "So in conclusion," Jess said, clicking to her next slide, "the subject displays hunting patterns remarkably similar to Earth's apex predators, just with added psychological warfare components. Which, honestly, is kind of overkill." like bringing a tactical nuke to a knife fight. Professor Zextalax's tentacles rippled with academic excitement. Miss Cooper, your data on the Night Stalker's bioluminescent attack patterns is unprecedented. No one has ever gotten close enough to document the frequency variations. Oh, that was the fun part, Jess replied, pulling up her spectral analysis. See these pulses here. Classic predator intimidation display, like a rattlesnake's warning but with prettier lights. The neural disruption effect is neat, but it's basically just a fancy laser pointer. A Voidborn student raised a shadowy appendage. But the psychic terror wavelengths are only effective if you let them be, Jess explained, clicking to a diagram of predator psychology. The thing about apex predators is they're used to everything being afraid of them. When something isn't scared, like, say, a human who grew up wrangling angry bulls, they don't really have a backup plan. The lecture hall erupted in whispers and various forms of agitated bioluminescence. The human treated a Class 5 death entity like an unruly farm animal. Someone muttered in disbelief. Actually, Jess corrected, pulling up a comparison chart, the Night Stalker's behavior is more like a big cat's. Once you understand the basic predator psychology, it's pretty straightforward. Here, watch this footage. The holoscreen showed Jess calmly taking samples while the Night Stalker, terror of 3 sectors, sat confusion-bonked beside her like an oversized house cat. Note the shifted body language, she pointed out. Once it realized intimidation wasn't working, it defaulted to basic predator responses, just like the mountain lions back home when they realized the weird bipedal thing isn't running away. Zeitel, who had finally stopped stress photosynthesizing, raised a trembling leaf. But what about its notorious hunting intelligence, the strategic thinking that drove the Praxians to extinction? Oh, it's smart all right, Jess agreed, switching to a tactical analysis. But it's smart like a predator, not smart like prey. See these patterns. She highlighted several movement sequences. Classic ambush predator overconfidence. It never occurred to it that it might be the one being hunted. The psychology department representatives were practically vibrating with excitement. And the ear scratches. Was that part of your scientific methodology? Nah, that was just being polite, Jess grinned. Where I come from, you always thank your study subjects, even the ones that try to eat you. Professor Zextalax's color shifted to deep academic appreciation. Miss Cooper, your approach to apex predator studies is unconventional, but the results are undeniable. This is the most comprehensive analysis of Night Stalker behavior ever compiled. Thanks, Professor. Though honestly, the hardest part was getting it to hold still for the blood samples. Reminded me of trying to vaccinate the neighbor's cat back home. All attitude until you find the right scratch spot. A security officer tentatively raised a claw. About that, the Night Stalker has been displaying unusual behavior since your encounter. It appears to be watching the human biology labs with interest. Oh yeah, Jess nodded, pulling up one final slide. I think it's gotten curious about humans, been leaving me little presents too. Dead prey specimens, territory markers, the usual predator friendship offerings. I've been meaning to ask, can I do my graduate research on long-term Night Stalker socialization patterns? The entire lecture hall went dead silent. You want to socialize with the Night Stalker? Seattle's translator glitched from sheer stress. Sure, she's actually pretty sweet once you get past the whole terror of the galaxy thing. Kind of like my aunt's Persian cat, but with better table manners. Professor Zextalax's tentacles tied themselves into what would later be classified as an entirely new mathematical knot. I believe, he said faintly, we may need to create an entirely new research department. The Galactic Academy's curriculum underwent several significant changes in the months following what became known as the Cooper Incident. Most notably, the Xenobiology department added a new required course, Human Approaches to Apex Predator Studies, though most students just called it, Please Don't Try This Without a Human Present. And that class, Professor Zextalax announced, his tentacles gesturing at the holoscreen, is why all specimen containment protocols now include the warning. In case of human interaction, previous behavioral predictions may not apply. The screen displayed footage of Jess's latest research session, where she appeared to be playing fetch with the Night Stalker using a reinforced Durasteel ball. Notice how the previously documented terror-inducing bioluminescent patterns are now being used to track the toy's trajectory, he noted. A complete reversal of predatory behavior that no one believed possible until Miss Cooper decided to. How did she put it? Treat it like a big space kitten with performance anxiety, quoted Xetal, who had somehow ended up as Jess's graduate research assistant. Their leaves no longer trembled when the Night Stalker was mentioned, though they still maintained a respectful distance of several hundred meters. The Academy's reputation had soared in scientific circles. 3 prestigious journals had published papers about Jess's methodology, though the most popular was titled Deathworlder Handling Techniques: Why Everything We Knew About Apex Predators Was Wrong. The Night Stalker, meanwhile, had developed some peculiar new habits. It still terrorized other species with ruthless efficiency, but whenever it heard country music playing from the human biology labs, it would slink over and sit expectantly by the door. The subject continues to display learned social behaviors. Jess's latest report read, "Brings me specimens it thinks will interest me, similar to how earth cats bring their owners prey." Though I had to explain why leaving a half-eaten Mordurian shadow beast in my lab wasn't appropriate. We're working on better gift-giving protocols. The security department had created an entirely new classification: conditionally docile, human presence required. They'd also started recruiting human staff after realizing that their previous containment protocols were, in Jess's words, about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. "Did you hear?" Kittel asked during one research session, watching from the safety of the observation dome, as Jess taught the Night Stalker basic tracking commands. 3 other academies have requested human xenobiologists for their predator studies programs. "Makes sense," Jess replied through the comm, casually scratching behind all 6 of the Night Stalker's eyes. Though they should probably start with something easier. Maybe those void stalkers everyone was so worried about. The pack hunters that drove the Centaurian Empire into bankruptcy. Yeah, they're basically just space wolves. Nothing a good Montana ranch kid couldn't handle. The Galactic Wildlife Conservation Court had offered Jess a job before she even graduated, creating a new position specifically for her, Apex Predator Relations Specialist. Her first assignment would be helping them relocate a pack of stellar dreadclaws that had taken up residence in a busy shipping lane. Just like moving mountain lions back home, she'd said, already planning her approach. Except these ones can survive in vacuum. Cool. But perhaps the most significant change was to the Academy's official species classification system. Under humans, they'd added a new note. Warning. Appears to be the only known species that treats apex predators as potential research assistants. Exercise extreme caution when attempting to exercise caution around them. "You know what's funny?" Jess said one day, as she and her scaly research partner reviewed data on other galactic predators. "Back home, this would just be another day at work. Though I guess the glowing patterns are prettier than a mountain lion's spots." The Night Stalker, terror of 3 sectors, and newly appointed assistant researcher, unofficial title, just purred its earth-shaking purr and continued helping her sort holophiles with its telekinetic field. "Best homework assignment ever," Jess grinned, reaching for her recorder. "Now about teaching you to help with specimen collection." In the observation dome, Xetal just shook their leaves and started drafting another research paper, the working title, Montana Style, a revolutionary approach to interspecies relations. The galaxy would never be quite the same, and somewhere in Montana, a family of ranchers was mighty proud of their girl out there, teaching space monsters proper manners.